Morning, guys. Happy Monday to you. We're on part 3 of the first part of chapter 4 in First Thessalonians. Got it? So we are, remember the main idea of the whole book of First Thessalonians is that Jesus is coming soon. And so we see as we move chapter by chapter what Paul is doing. And when we get to the text on Wednesday, we're really going to see him hear him talk about the return of Christ and really what that means. But all the things that have built up till now are leading us to that big part of chapter 4. But this week's and last week's has been doing the will of God and knowing the will of God. And we've really tried to demystify what it means to do the will of God, because we often think of it wrongly. And so we saw him laying out for us at the beginning to live a life that's pleasing to God. That's the will of God. To pursue holiness. That's the will of God. That's kind of what we did on Wednesday. Today, we'll see that loving your brother is the will of God. And we're going to start in verse 9 of chapter 4. Here's what it says. Now, concerning brotherly love, you have no need for anyone to write to you, for you yourselves have been taught by God to love one another. For that indeed is what you are doing to all the brothers throughout Macedonia. So first, in other words, it's interesting how Paul does this. He says, you don't need anybody to tell you this. And then he proceeds to tell them that thing. We don't need anybody we don't have to tell you to love your brother, but love your brother. And it's a good reminder. I mean, I know a lot of people in my life, and if you're listening to this, and I know you, chances are you're one of those people too, that I think are just excellent at loving their brother. But you know what? I think we all need reminders from time to time. Man, we're supposed to do that. We're supposed to love our neighbor as ourselves. And our neighbor, as Jesus teaches us, right, is really anyone that we're in contact with. That's my neighbor. Even people that don't look like me or act like me or think like me or don't even like me, those are still my neighbor. And so I'm called to love them. And that is the will of God. But then he says this. So he says, we don't have to remind you to do this, but we're going to remind you to do this. And we urge you to do this more and more. And here we go. First, aspire to live quietly. One of the ways we love our neighbors is by aspiring to live quietly, to live lives of gentleness. That doesn't mean you're not necessarily a loud neighbor. If you have children or party, that doesn't make you a bad neighbor. To live quietly, humbly, to live in such a way that your people like living around you, or people like knowing you as a neighbor. To be a neighbor in this way, people should feel like their lives are better because they know you. And to mind your own affairs. Yeah, that's a tough one, right? We all live in a small town around here, and in this town, maybe your small town that you live in is not to say, but in our small town, minding your own affairs is not a thing that you see a whole lot of folks doing super well. So it's a good reminder. Mind your own affairs. Work with your hands as we instructed you. Now, it doesn't mean if you have an office job that you're not fulfilling this. It doesn't just mean to literally work with your hands. It means to work diligently, to be hard at work, that people should see you and see that you're a hard worker, so that you may live properly before outsiders. First reason, the world's looking in. They need to see that you love the Jesus that you profess to love. And then second, so that you would be dependent on no one. The idea is to work so that the people around us don't have to take care of us. Now, maybe you're the kind of person, maybe you're in a situation in life in which you've had to be cared for by somebody. That's okay. This is the goal. The goal and the intention of the Christian life is for us to get to the point where we are not dependent on others, but we recognize that we are always dependent on God. So that's the call, to be a good neighbor. To be a good neighbor is to do the will of God. To love the people in our little bubble, the people that we see today, people that we're around today, is what it means to be a good neighbor. So here's my challenge for today with this text. I want to challenge you. There's somebody in your circle that's harder to love than somebody else is. I want to challenge you to think of real and intentional ways that you can show love for that person, because when you do that, I think you're doing the will of God, and you're doing it in the way that Jesus has called us to do it. Guys, we're gathering on Sunday in our building. 2 services, YouTube video will be out later on today that will describe a little bit more about this again. But want to encourage you, and I hope that I'll see you on Sunday. But if not, no, I cannot wait to see you again soon. Wednesday morning, we'll start the next part of chapter 4, and we'll talk about the coming of the Lord. It's kind of what we've been building up to. So, all right, guys, talk to you soon.